Passamaquoddy, Lampe Duwashte. Welcome to the ICT Newscast. I'm Shirley Snavy. Sorry, not sorry. That's the message the Trump administration has for President Joe Biden's apology for the federal government's role in Indian boarding schools. I asked national correspondent Marionette Pember what happened. Hi, Marionette. Is going on here? How did you find out about this?
Well, I happened to be reading a story in the New York Times that was about something completely different. And they stated that they found out that the link to the apology that Biden made in October 2024 was gone. And it just says doesn't exist. So I got to looking at some other things. I was interested in learning about the national monument that Biden had designated Carlisle National Monument for boarding schools. And that link is also down.
So it sounds like he doesn't want to, the Trump administration, the new administration, I get this, doesn't want to acknowledge the work of his previous administration. We heard a lot about the ideology is anti-American. And I just want to know from you, what's anti-American about recognizing the horrible past in the boarding school era?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, one of my sources described these kinds of things as the naughty words. And the naughty words include anything that can be construed to reference DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So perhaps somehow this triggered some red flags. However, interestingly, nobody would respond to me about this either way.
And you reached out to a lot of people, including the Gila River tribe, where the apology by Biden was made in October. Did you hear back from them?
No, except that the governor has declined to comment. He's actually the only person I heard back from in any way. And I reached out to the Department of the Interior, the Bureau of Indian Affairs. I reached out to Carolyn Levitt, who is the press secretary for President Trump. I reached out to the White House, and I heard nothing. The silence was stunning.
And this is also attached to funds, I would imagine, some of the funds probably that are going to recording the history of survivors of boarding schools.
Well, I think, the apology did not include any funding component. However, the monument would include whatever the cost would be associated with creating a national monument that Biden declared through the Antiquities Act. And so some people are saying that there is no process within the Antiquities Act to reverse a designation. But then some other attorneys are saying, well, it just falls under the purview of the president and he can, do that at any time. It's a discretionary element. So I imagine this will be sorted out in the courts, or at least they will attempt to do so.
Thank you for your time, Marionette.
Well, thank you for having me, Shirley.
A rally at the Wisconsin State Capitol called attention to a crisis in the state's tribal communities. ICT reporter Erica Ayesi spoke with a task force that gathers data on this issue. This report is in collaboration with our partners at Here and Now at Wisconsin PBS.
A day of remembrance.
I am a relative of Caitlin Kelly, the Indigenous young woman that was stolen from us on June 19th, 2021, and was tragically murdered.
For Wisconsin's missing and murdered Indigenous people.
Today we honor our relatives that are still out there missing. Today we honor our relatives that have been murdered.
Over 20 speakers gathered outside the Capitol.
Today we stand together in solidarity, in unity, to bring justice, to bring awareness.
Awareness about the disproportionate number of missing and murdered Indigenous people in Wisconsin's native tribes.
Reese Spokane was my auntie.
Family members said their loved ones' names, a reminder to the public that their relative is not forgotten.
My little brother Sean Greeno was brutally murdered on the reservation. And also my nephew Corey Greeno.
A single red hand symbol printed on shirts, skirts, and signs, signaling that a member of the Indigenous community left home and never returned.
I had a son murdered 1 year ago. These two boys, they were best friends. They died together, and their killer's still out there.
A Milwaukee mother grieves and calls for justice.
Monroe Wiesel and Alex Sanchez. We need justice.
Missing and murdered Indigenous people is an increasing concern, affecting all of Wisconsin's native tribes. Many of these cases go unsolved, like the murder of Andy Lemke's cousin.
Ray Elaine went missing when we were just 18 years old. She had a 6-week-old baby, Elise.
Shannon Holsey, president of Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohican Indians, says addressing the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous people starts by dismantling erasure towards Native Americans and respecting tribal sovereignty.
Accepting what sovereignty looks like, allowing tribal nations to exercise that sovereignty, and looking at cross-jurisdictional ways to share that data to make sure that we come together as collective people and understand that this is not an MMIR crisis, this is a humanitarian effort.
In 2020, State Attorney General Josh Kaul formed the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Task Force to help address this effort. According to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, there's over 4,000 unsolved cases across America. But here in Wisconsin, that exact number is difficult to track. The task force says they're releasing a report by the end of this year, and the exact number of missing Indigenous people in Wisconsin is also missing.
We lack resources, including just simple databases. Every other police officer in the state has access to an NCIC database where when a person goes missing, that will go throughout all the police forces, and we don't have access to that type of equipment. That's very vital when our relatives go missing. So
Justine Rufus, chair of the Wisconsin's Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Task Force, says their upcoming report includes a request for $3.5 million.
For liaison positions, and why we decided that we needed to do that is because as a task force, we never anticipated families coming directly to us and needing our assistance when their relatives went missing, or for them to come to us if they wanted to look at cold cases.
About 80% of Indigenous people live in urban areas. Others live on reservations. Rufus says part of their action plans for the state are collaborative efforts between county and tribal jurisdictions.
We really rely on our county partners to identify us correctly and to get that data back to our tribal communities, and that system just isn't in place. And so that's something that we are recommending.
Stories of pain.
Ray Elaine Turlot was my cousin.
And loss.
Mary C. Tamau.
Were matched with support for healing.
We need to hear these stories, and these stories need to be told because we need justice. We need healing.
Kyle Stout. He was murdered.
Braxton Lee Phillips, you are never forgotten.
For ICT, I'm Erica Aisi from the homelands of Ho-Chunk.
A 2-night documentary series premieres May 27th on the History Channel. It features Michael Spears as Sitting Bull. ICT special correspondent Sandra Schulman has this interview.
Hi, Michael Spears. Very good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Oh,
So you're coming from Montana, and we're going to talk about your role in Sitting Bull. How did you approach the role as such a pivotal figure, in history?
I'm Titwan Sichangu Lakota. I just, I dug and reached back in my own quiver, and, growing up in Lower Brule and South Dakota and now Montana, I just reached back and depended on my teachings, depended on what I learned from my father, my grandfather, my mom, my grandmas, and using especially in the language, and using all those tools that I had growing up. I had a lot to lean back on.
Sitting Bull distinguished himself as maybe one of the greatest warriors in North America.
Sitting Bull was a grassroots leader, a heroic freedom fighter.
He was a thinker. He was a visionary.
And he always looked out for his people. He would never abandon their culture and their way of life.
Sitting Bull grew up in a time that was very prosperous and powerful for the Lakota people.
But in one of the great migrations in American history, people started flooding the West.
Sitting Bull said, these white people, they keep coming and coming and coming.
Sitting Bull was adamantly opposed to moving to a reservation.
He said, we cannot strike deals. They are astonishingly greedy, and they are also unrelentingly violent. So we will resist to the last person.
And this was his destiny.
Sitting Bull becomes a name known far and wide in the United States and even the world.
The government's propping him up as like a boogeyman.
He said, I have done what I should do to defend my homeland.
In the United States, where freedom is the foundation of our society, here is this man who fought for freedom for his people.
Sitting Bull is a symbol of Indigenous strength. He's not some distant historic figure. This is a real person who had a transformative effect in American history.
Was there things that you learned about him personally doing this that you weren't aware of?
He was such an incredible strategist. You know, I learned about his favorite song. I learned some of the language that had to be translated from Lakota to English and then back again. You know, Sitting Bull for me is a man that is still alive. You know, in all of our lifeways, in our ceremonies, in our hearts, in our minds. You know, the fight is still ongoing today. We have Lakota producers, Native producers. We have Indigenous narrators. We have, you know, all the details that went into forming this story. You know, his friendships, his childhood, everything that humanizes him. You know, and especially the language. You know, and not only the story itself, but the worldview of the Lakota. You know, and not just what we did as you know, on the timeline of things. You know, we did this and this happened and this happened. This is why, and this is what's still happening today.
So they killed you off in 1923, and then they killed you off in Sitting Bull, but I hope that the career survives. So what do you have coming up next?
Well, I'm attached to several scripts. I've got, as an actor, we're always auditioning. We're always hoping to be in the next thing. I really ain't at liberty to say some of the projects that I'm connected to that are about to start, but I do have a few features that we're going to be starting filming here within the next month or two. My most prized project that I'm working on right now actually is my children. I have 2 children here in Montana that are still in school. I have 4 children altogether, but I have my 2 youngest boys. One of them is still in school. He's going to be a senior. And I have my next oldest is Aiden, and he's an aspiring young actor and also going to be heading off to film school in the fall down at IAIA in Santa Fe.
Good to hear there's new projects and this great visibility, all these great TV shows with 1923 and now with Sitting Bull. Well, we look forward to come what's next. Well, thank you so much.
Aho, lila pilamalu. Thanks, Sandra. It's good to talk with you.
As the U.S. Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues wraps up its work, Jordan Bennett-Begay spoke with Vice Chair Jeffrey Roth about the challenges, debates, and progress made by the global Indigenous leaders.
Thanks, Shirley. I'm joined here by Jeff Roth, who is the Vice Chair of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Thanks for joining ICT, Jeff.
Hi.
So it's been a couple of weeks since the 24th session of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues that wrapped up in the UN headquarters in New York City. What stood out to you?
You know, it was, I have to say, a rather contentious session overall. And for a couple of different reasons. One, I think there's some political issues happening in the country right now that made it very difficult here in the United States. People were concerned in coming to New York. And so I think that kept a lot of Indigenous people globally from actually showing up for the forum. I'd also say that there's members on the forum, about half of the forum are timing out. So you serve 2 terms on the permanent forum. And so this is the last year for a lot of us, including me. And so people were very anxious that were actually on the forum. And we had a difficult time, I think, negotiating through the report that we put out at the end. Every word in the final report has to be reached by consensus for everyone, all 16 of us on the forum. And I would say it becomes an even more difficult task because half of us are representative of Indigenous peoples organizations, like I am. The other half are representative of member countries of the United Nations. So as you can imagine, there's some real objections to some of the more strong language that we want to do.
I know the status was, or the conversation on the ground level was, they're talking about moving the permanent forum to another country, whereas it used to be in the US for quite some time. I mean, what's the status of that? Are they still talking about it, moving it?
Yeah, it was definitely a conversation that we brought up. Actually, even one of our members not able to get a visa or attend this year's forum. So unfortunately, it's going to at least be another year before the actual recommendation from the permanent forum can be made to move the forum. But I really think that we need to do that and to ensure that as many people as possible can participate in this forum from all countries of the world.
And from what I understand, there are a lot of tribal leaders there at the forum this year. And it got me thinking, why is it important for Native people in the U.S. to be involved in this international gathering? Because I feel like a lot of, local folks think, how do international issues affect me at a local level?
One of the main things that I've been talking about, and I think is going to be important for us as we organize here in the United States over the next couple of years is, we have an administration that is showing some difficulties towards Indian country right now, especially in like its proposed budget. I think that it's a good time for us to prepare and interact with the UN agencies, potentially get reports on some of the issues that are most important our tribes here in the United States, such as environmental concerns or water concerns or healthcare concerns, to really start documenting in the international forum, so that we have a administration that is more willing to work with us. I would say that's one reason why we need to be more prepared and more engaged.
And one of the big projects I think you've been working on is making indigeneity a social determinant of health. And for viewers, can you talk about what's the social determinant of health and also what's the status of making indigeneity part of that?
Yeah. So about 3 years ago, we wrote a report, a member study that I authored. Um, I gathered a group of Indigenous scholars and politicians and local leaders from around the world that helped me author this report to really identify what are the specific factors to Indigenous peoples that affect our health and wellness. So we identified 33 protective factors and risk factors. Protective factors being like, our language and our culture and the cultural transmission that occurs between elders and youth. And some of the negative factors as, environmental degradation and how it's, affecting our communities in way higher percentage than other communities. We identified these factors, and then we've been working closely with the WHO and other organizations to really look at specifically looking at indigeneity and all of these 33 factors under the term of indigeneity. I'm happy to announce that last week on Monday, May 6th, the WHO released their first update to the Social Determinants of Health Equity report in about 10 years. And in that document, they acknowledge these 33 risk and protective factors, along with indigeneity as a social determinant of health equity determinant specifically for Indigenous people. So We're really excited about that and plan on doing more work around that for the rest of the year. We've been talking to the National Indian Health Board and the National Congress of American Indians about highlighting some of this work at their upcoming conferences.
Well, thanks for that update, and thanks for joining us on the show today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
One of the oldest tribal colleges has new leadership. I met the new president on the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. Take a look. Sinte Gleska University seated its second president last fall after its founding president, Lionel Bordeaux, died from COVID 2 years ago. Erica Moore has been in higher education in South Dakota for a decade. With high unemployment and health issues that surround poverty, Sinte Gleska has faced challenges.
No matter what sort of the university has gone through, what the community has gone through, there has always remained this sort of passion to see this be the best university that it could be, but always when we talk about it, or when the community members or the students or staff or faculty talk about it, they always talk about the future, like what this could be for the children that aren't even out of K through 12 yet. And then that sort of, I loved how that's like spurred into, they want and are passionate about also working with the K through 12 schools, the Department of Education. We work really well with the Tribal Education Office, who also has just created the SIPL, which is Sichangu Indigenous Principles of Learning, a curriculum. So I feel like even though things have been heavy or hard and lost with the loss of Lionel and the 2 years of without a president, they have continued on, and they're still just so hopeful and so positive and really just determined and passionate about the work. So I think it's really interesting to see that the passions and the dreams that we read about from the founders who created the universities are still here with everyone.
Enrollment has increased by 200 students due to online learning that started during COVID.
Pre-COVID, all of our courses were predominantly in person. And then through the sort of COVID situation, it moved online, not by choice, but we were able then to achieve through accreditation to be able to offer distance education. So in some ways it was a positive. We're now able to reach more students, but now we're also seeing that the majority of our classes are being held online, and it kind of removes us from the place-based mission that we had in the first place. And so our goal is to return, but here we are 5 years later, and we're still majority distance education here, even at Sinte Gleska.
For ICT from the homelands of the Sichangu Lakota, I'm Shirley Snavy. We turn now to the Dawnland, to the state of Maine, where the celebration of Indigenous knowledge took center stage at a university commencement ceremony.
Dwayne Toma is a Passamaquoddy language teacher, culture bearer, and all-around Wabanaki ambassador.
Yeah, and is Dwayne Toma. My name is Dwayne Toma from Pleasant Point,
and today he has a new title, Doctor, after the University of Maine at Machias honored him this month at commencement ceremonies. And Toma addressed the graduates.
It's really an honor for me to be here with you this morning. Today, our message today is about kindness.
But it was more than just an individual recognition. It was another step into the spotlight for Indigenous people, knowledge, values, and wisdom.
Because it's so important for, Indigenous people to stand up and come to the forefront and be leaders, and to be able to share a lot of this knowledge, and especially this knowledge that has been handed down, from our people for thousands of years. And it's really interesting how these institutions are actually embracing this Indigenous knowledge.
The recognition is a building block of a larger narrative.
Starting in 2011, 2012, we really have concentrated programs that recognize our Indigenous students, our Indigenous faculty, our Indigenous citizens as unique assets, and support them as critical partners in shaping the future of our scholarship and what Maine will look like. For us, recognizing someone like Dwayne is just a small part and a small step in that work, and make right relationships across this, and really honor the knowledge and the role of Wabanaki people across what is now the state of Maine.
University officials hope Toma's message sinks in for the graduates.
Just to provide a different lens through which to think about what it means to graduate and enter the world as a sort of like newly formed kind of adult, and the responsibilities that we have in this world that he provides.
Wuli Bamusan. Wuli Bamusan in our language means to walk in a good way. It's very important for us to carry ourselves in a good way and to protect our mother, and that is the earth. So whatever it is that you could do to protect our mother, to get involved and stand up and be heard collectively and build relationships and work together, that's important for all of us.
For ICT, I'm Stuart Huntington.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.